Good morning, friends. I am Professor Swapnil Gosavi, and we are going to continue the lecture series on history of English literature. And today we will discuss on the Elizabethan age. And at the beginning, we are going to start the poetry. So here we find, friends, Totus Miscellany, which came in 1557. It's summed up in the work of Watt and Surrey. Both Watt and Surrey poetic achievement of the early English Renaissance we have already seen. Nothing of real merit appeared during the next 2 decades, for though there are some good things in Saquille and Gascoigne, we here saw. And both Saquilla and Gascoigne did not make any significant contribution. Then a new star suddenly blazed on the literary firmament, and that star was the brightening star, the amazing star, whose name was Edward Spencer. So, with Edward Spencer, we are in the full tide of the Renaissance in England. The appearance and the production of the Shepherd's Calendar in 1579 opened a new epoch in English poetry. Nothing like this had been written after Chaucer, and Spencer was universally acclaimed at, as the topmost poet of the age. His position as the second great poet of England was confirmed by the publication. 11 years later, in the Fairy Queen, we find it the achievement, the greatness of the Edmund Spencer. So, talking about Edmund Spencer, so Spencer belonged to a poor Lancashire family. He was born in London about 1552. He was educated at Cambridge, where he took his MA degree in 1576. He was admitted to the household of the Earl of Leicester and thus to the friendship of Sir Philip Sidney. He was the friend of Sir Philip Sidney, and we must know that Sir Philip Sidney was his nephew. In 1580, Spencer went to Ireland as secretary to the governor and lived there an exile for the rest of his life, except for 2 short visits to England. Spencer held various government offices in Ireland and ultimately settled there on a large estate granted to him. There, Spencer was visited by Sir Walter Raleigh, to whom he read his Fairy Queen. Sir Walter was so delighted with the poem that he brought him over to England and introduced him to the Queen Elizabeth. And Queen Elizabeth conferred upon him a pension of $50 a year. It was during this visit that The Fairy Queen, containing the first 3 books, was published in 1590. On Spencer's second visit to England between 1595 to 96, he brought with him the other 3 books of The Fairy Queen, and these were published in 1596. Failing to obtain any further court favor, he returned to Ireland. In a rebellion in 1598, Spencer's castle was burned down and he escaped to England. Spencer died in extreme poverty at an inn in London in January 1599. Spencer was buried near Chaucer in the Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. Now, talking about his works, Edmund Spencer, this is also very important and the great personality whom about we are going to discuss. So, besides the Shepherd's Calendar and the Fairy Queen, Spencer's most important works are Astrophel. Astrophel is a pastoral elegy on the death of Sir Philip Sidney. The next poem was Cooling Clouds Come Home Again. After that, Amoretti. Amoretti is a sonnet cycle. The next poem was Epithalamion. Epithalamion is a marriage ode, both addressed to his wife. means Amorten epithalamion. After that, there was a prothalamion. In the prothalamion, he celebrates the marriage of the two daughters of the Earl of Worcester. And the last one, there was four hymns in honor of love and beauty. So among his minor works, maybe mention we can say that there was his minor works title, the complaints containing sundry small poems of the world's vanity, and Mother's Hubbard's Tale and Tears of the Muses. These two poems are of interest as showing Spencer's pessimism induced by personal frustration. His disappointment in getting court favor found expression in Hubbard's Tale. Mother Hubbard's Tale is a satire on the court, the clergy, and Lord Burleigh, Burleigh. Actually, Lord Burleigh was the close-fisted chancellor of the Elizabeth Queen. Yes. There was another poem, Tears of the Muses, and this poem bewails, Bewails, the sad state of the muses who have no patrons in this barbaric age. So there was his poem. Title was The Shepherd's Calendar. We must discuss it in detail or something little bit because this poem made made the Spencer's poetic style grand because with this poem Spencer made his poetic debut is a pastoral poem model on Theocritus, Theocritus, and Virgil, and their Italian and French followers of the Renaissance. The poem The Shepherd's Calendar consists of 12 eclogues or short pastoral poems, one for each month of the year. They are in the form of dialogues among shepherds, including the poet under the name of Colin Clout, Colin Colin Clout, Clout. Though the calendar is Renaissance in spirit, it is written in deliberately archaic language to give it a national character. The most remarkable thing about it, however, is the richness and variety of the meters used. The stanzas are of different kinds and lines of every length. The principle of balance and symmetry is meticulously observed. It was this artistry, this virtuosity of form, which gave the shepherd's calendar its special character at a time when poetry was still crude and formless. The subject is of little importance. England is represented as a vast sheep farm ruled by the shepherd queen Elisa, Elisa. Elisa was the daughter of Pan, Pan, and Syrinx, Syrins. Against this background, the poet discourses of love, poetry, Puritanism, and other current topics. So here find some poems. So there was another poem, Astrophel. So the poem Astrophel is a pastoral elegy on the death of Sir Philip Sidney. It is in the form of allegory. Though graceful in its decorative disguise, it hardly elevates the romantic hero of Zutphen, Zutphen. Next poem was Calling Clouds Come Home Again is another pastoral poem. It is the most autobiographical and the most lively of Spencer's works. In it are recorded the poet's experience of his first visit to England in 1589-90, when he was introduced by Sir Walter Raleigh to the Queen and published his Fairy Queen. There was another poem, the Amoretti and the Epithalamion. After his return to Ireland, Spencer fell in love with Elizabeth Boyle. And Elizabeth Boyle is known as a country lass. Country, country lass, Lasse. Actually, lass means a girl. And Elizabeth Boyle was his neighbor, means Spencer's neighbor. The lady was won after the long and agonizing courtship. Spencer recorded his emotions in the series of sonnets called Amoretti, Amoretti. They have been disparaged by some critics as average, but no dispassionate reader can fail to be impressed by their beauty. The distinction of Spencer's sonnets is that the love expressed in them was real and not pretended. It was the case with the generality of sonnets. Besides, it was pure. His friend Sidney's love also seems to have been sincere, but it was not pure in that it was for married women. In form, Spencer's sonnets are neither Petrarchan nor strictly Shakespearean. They have three quatrains and a couplet. The rhyme scheme is AB AB BC BC ED ED EE. Coming to the Prothalamion, it is written in honor of the double marriage of the two daughters of the Earl of Worcester. It is enough to say that the spousal, Spousal, it is a song, and the song is second only to the Epithalamion and to no other. To appreciate Coleridge's praise of its swan-like movement, the poem has to be read in its entirely, and there we find that this poem, Epithalamion, is the best and most delightful poem we must know. Now there is a further poem, the four hymns to love and beauty. So, though among the last of the publication, two of these hymns, Spencer says, were written in the greener days of his youth, as they were in praise of earthly love and earthly beauty. His better judgment disapproved of them, so he amended them and added two more in honor of heavenly love and heavenly beauty. It is necessary to understand this change as it has a direct bearing on Spencer's philosophy of beauty as expressed in his works. Spencer, as a child of Renaissance, was a passionate lover of beauty in all forms, particularly beauty in women, but he was also a Puritan, and though a refined one, his conscience troubled him. He was torn by a conflict between paganism and Christianity. In order to reconcile the conflicting claims of the flesh and the spirit, he took refuge in the idealistic doctrine of Plato, who had identified supreme beauty with virtue. It is this spiritual conception of love and beauty that finds its loftiest expression in these hymns. Beauty here is not so much the beauty of mortal body as that of the immortal spirit. The following spirit, the Fairy Queen, the next poem. In the preparatory letter to Sir Walter Raleigh, described the plan of writing Fairy Queen. Spencer says that its aim was to fashion a gentleman or noble person in virtuous and gentle discipline. In other words, the author wanted to portray an ideal gentleman. For this purpose, he chose King Arthur, who was to exhibit in his person. Before becoming the King Arthur, before becoming the Arthur as a king, magnificence or magnanimity, which according to Aristotle is the perfection of all the 12 ethical or private moral virtues enumerated by him. The Fairy Queen was to set forth these 12 virtues in 12 books. A second part, consisting presumably of the same number of books, was to deal with politic or public virtues of Arthur after he became king. To say nothing of the second part, only 6 of the projected 12 books of the first were completed. Uh, so there is a plot, there is given the story, so very short story. So it is very nice poem. So talking about the poem, so the story like this: the Prince Arthur falls in love with Gloriana, Glorana. Gloriana is the fairy of Queen, and after seeing Gloriana, King Arthur sees in a dream. He sets out on his journey to her court in fairyland where she is holding her annual 12-day festival. On each of these days, a knight representing one of the virtues undertakes an adventure. Arthur is brought into these adventures, which end successfully through his aid. This seems to have been the plan as explained in the prefatory, later referred to above, but it is not fully carried out. For the author plunges straight into the adventure of the knights, intending to fill the gaps and round off the story. In the last of the 12 books, of which, as we must know, so 6 are written, so we are talking about it. So, book first, talking about firstly, book first. In the book first, the adventures of the Red Cross Knight or Holiness, who protects UNA, or true religion, means Protestant Church, against the enchanter Archimago, Archimago, or hypocrisy, and Diosa, or falsehood, Roman Catholic Church. Talking about the second book, The Adventures of Sir Guyon, Guyon, or Temperance, the chief of which are his visit to the cave of Mammon and destruction of Acacia, of Intemperance and her boar Bliss. Book third, The Adventures of Female Knight Britomaratis, Britomartis, or Chastity, Chastity. Book 4, The Legend of Triamond and Campbell, symbolizing friendship. Book 5th, The Adventures of Artigal, or Justice, with references to various historical events of Elizabeth's reign, such as the Spanish defeat in the Netherlands, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, and last one is Book 6, which shows the adventures of Sir Calidore or Courtesy. So, the poem The Fairy Queen was inspired by Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, but it differs from its Italian model in that it is not merely a romance but an allegorical romance with the set purpose of teaching high moral lessons. This was foreign to the Italian romancers. It is precisely this didacticism that has made the poem less popular than it might otherwise have been. It has met the same fate as Paradise Lost. All admire but few read it. Spencer succeeds neither as allegorist nor as romancer. The allegory hampers the romance, and the romance hampers an allegory. So here we must discuss about Spencer's. We must discuss about Spencer's. So right, we find that to his own age, Spencer may have been a teacher. To us, he is the first and last, the incomparable painter and musician in verse. For sheer beauty of words and the soothing harmonies of the stanzas, framing them, he has no equal in English poetry. He seemed to possess an unlimited capacity to throw out such stanzas of luscious music by the hundred. It is by virtue of this seemingly inexhaustible power of producing pictorial and rhythmic beauty that he has been called the poet's poet. Means Edmund Spenser was called the poet's poet. He has inspired more poets than any other in the English language. They have instinctively turned to his artistic language and metrical music. The praise, however, carries its own limitations. He may be the poet's poet, but not the average reader. So here, very nice explanation is given. So the stanza which he invented and which is called after him the Spenserian stanza. It was a stroke of genius, in the words of Sainsbury. It was one of the crowning achievements of poetical inspiration in form, and it consists of 9 line rhyming scheme: A B A B B C B C, and last one is C. The last being an Alexandrine or line of 6 iambic feet instead of 5 as in the others. It is particularly suitable for a long and continuous poem, its last line giving it a slow, stately movement. It became very popular in the latter Romantic revival and was used by Thomson, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, and there is the end of, we can say that, Edmund Spencer. So there is after that we are talking about the Spencer's contemporaries. It is very important for us. And next one, in Spencer's contemporary, there was a famous personality whose name was the Philip Sidney, whose lifetime was, we can see that, 1554 to 1586. So, unlike Spencer, who began life as a poor man and died poor, Spencer born died, yes, born poor, died poor. Spencer, but his friend, Sir Philip Sidney, was an aristocrat personality. He came of a very high family, and Sidney was educated at Oxford. Sidney traveled over Europe. Spencer dedicated his shepherd's calendar to Sidney, and Spencer described Sidney as the noble and virtuous gentleman most worthy of all titles both of learning and chivalry. So there is neither flattery nor exaggeration in this description. We find Spencer, we can say that, what we can say that Spencer praises Sydney, not only praises whatever is there. So ahead we find that talking about Sydney. So there is neither flattery nor exaggeration in this description. So Sydney relies in his person as nearly as possible for any man, the Renaissance idol of the perfect gentleman. So Sydney was a knight of chivalry. He was a polished courtier. He was a finished scholar. And Sydney died fighting at Zutphen, yes, in Netherlands at the age of 32. Oh my God, very easily in young age he passed away. The story of his noble act on the battlefield is well known. As he lay dying, he gave the cup of water which he needed himself to another wounded soldier, saying, "Thy need is greater than mine." The traditional halo of romance about his person has not dimmed with the passage of time. So, Sidney's poetical work is great, and it consists of the sonnet series Astrophel and Stella, and a few other scattered sonnets and verses in his prose romance Arcadia. The Arcadia, Arcadia, and Arcadia, and his critical treatise Apology for Poetry, and we will discuss about it, Apology of Poetry. So none of Sidney's works were published in his lifetime, and Astrophel and Stella must have circulated privately in manuscript before 1591 when it was published. And Astrophel and Stella is a series of more than 100 sonnets, together with some songs addressed to Penelope, Penelope Devereux, Devereux. And Penelope Devereux was the daughter of Walter Devereux, and Walter Devereux was the first Earl of Essex. The sonnets record his hopeless passion for Penelope, who had married Lord Rich. Oh my God, yes, it is. We can say that heartbreak. Except for the rhyme scheme, which is not uniform, the sonnets of Sidney are English or Shakespearean in form, with three quatrains and a couplet. The general level of these sonnets is very high, despite the fact that Sidney is not above using the conventional conceits or labored ingenuities of expression. Sidney was not a mere copyist. The note of sincerity is struck in the last line of the first sonnet, full. Said my muse to me, look in thy heart and write. Very nice lines written by, and there was a very nice line I want to say before you, I want to present before you. That line is, come, sleep, oh sleep, the certain note of peace. And there was another line about love, that leave me, oh love, which reaches but to dust. So very nice writer. And now we must talk about the sonnets in the Elizabethan age after Sydney. So here we find that after its introduction by Watt and Surrey, it means Watt and Surrey introduced sonnet. Yes, but after Watt and Surrey, the sonnet in its strict form was not practiced for a whole generation. But Sydney restarted. Sir Philip Sidney restarted the fashion of writing sonnets, and there was an extraordinary outburst of sonnets in the last decade of the century. Almost all poets of the period wrote sonnet sequence, good, bad, and indifferent. It addressed to their sweethearts, real or imagined, and the more important of these are some examples of sonnets written in the Elizabethan are Caelica, Caelica, written by Fulke Greville. Another was Delia, Delia, written by Samuel Daniel. After that, Idea, written by Michael Drayton. And after that, Amoretti, written by Edmund Spenser. And there was Diana, written by Henry Constable. And Shakespeare, the greatest personality, also wrote sonnets. So each of the poets mentioned above is some distinct or other. Fulke Greville is too scholarly to be very popular personality, but his Caelica, Caelica, has a few delightful things. Especially his lines on Myra begins I with begins the line is listen the line I with whose colors Myra dressed her hair. Though Daniel and Drayton, both major poets, like the snooze of the sonnet. So here we find that Drayton is more vigorous and forthright personality. After that, Constable's sonnets have the charm of the delicacy, fancy, and scholarly elegance. And talking about Shakespeare's sonnets, these are the class one sonnets written by himself. You know very well Shakespeare, but as a sonnet writer, we must talk here. Actually, he was the famous dramatist, but he also composed some verses, and especially in sonnet form. So, as a sonnet, we will talk about Shakespeare here. So the collection is unequal, and some of the sonnets are merely clever, being fashionable exercises in quibbles and conceits common to the generality of sonnetists. But the best of them are worthy of the great poet, and in their high imaginative quality, felicity of diction, and lyrical music are unequaled in Elizabethan poetry. Only Milton's sonnet, when they appeared, could challenge comparison with his. The collection is miscellaneous as well as mystifying, and the introduced researchers of more than 3 centuries have not penetrated the mystery of the persons addressed in the sonnets. Some of them are quite personal. Of the personal sonnets, some are addressed to a friend, a handsome young man of rank and wealth, and some to a dark haired lady. The friend is popularly identified with Shakespeare's patron, the young Earl of Southampton, to whom he dedicated his narrative poem Venus and Adonis and the Rape of the Lucrece. The dark lady whom Shakespeare loved betrayed him with his patron friend. He forgives the friend but is unforgiving to the lady on uh, whom he pours his vials of wrath and hate. The original source of inspiration of all these sonnet sequences was, of course, Petrarch, whose love sonnets to Laura, Laura, had started the fashion of Italy and then in France. The English poets imitated, borrowed, sometimes simply translated from their Italian or French masters. Because of this, some critics have condemned the whole lot as artificial. It is undeniable, we can say that. So here lyrics and songs are there. So we find other kinds of poetry. So other type of poetry were written in this era. So we find that lyrics and songs flourish in this age. We find so humanism had revealed to the peoples a new joy in life, and this joy burst into song. England became a nest of singing birds. Lyrics and songs by the hundred written by poets known and unknown appeared in collections of the type of Totel's miscellany. We have already mentioned two of the miscellanies. The first one is the Paradise of Dainty Devices, and the second one is the Gorgeous Gallery of Gallant Inventions. And these lyrics were written before Spenser. These were crude as compared with those which followed them in the Spenserian period. For example, a handful of pleasant delights, the Phoenix next, the passionate pilgrim, England's helicon, and poetical rhapsody. RHAPSODY. The best of these is England's helicon, which contains poems by most of the poets of this period, including Sidney, Spenser, Drayton, Lodge, Peele, Green, Marlowe, Watson, Nicholas, Breton, Barnfield, Raleigh, and Shakespeare. The majority of the poems in these collections are anonymous, only a few being signed, and but for these anthologies, even the names of some of the songsters would have been lost. Of the numerous song books, the most famous were the four books of airs written by Campion, Campion, containing songs set to music. Beside the miscellaneous and songs books, songs are found scattered through stories and plays of the period. Though Spencer, though Spencer was not devoted to the lyric, he has given us some delightful songs in the Shepherd's Calendar and the Fairy Queen. Sidney's songs in the Astropian Stella have already been alluded to, and there are some very good ones in his Arcadia. The best songs of this age, however, were written by the dramatists Lilly, Peele, Lodge, Nash, Green, Marlowe, Shakespeare, Beaumont, Fletcher, Dekker, Haywood, Ben Jonson. These people composed songs, and there we find the glory of song written by Shakespeare. Yes, very grand. The songs sprinkled through Shakespeare's plays are unsurpassed for their originality, spontaneity, feeling for nature, and verbal music. And they are of all sorts. There are love songs, nature songs, pathetic songs, and songs that are purely fantastic. And there are some example of the song in the Merchant of Venice written by Shakespeare. There is the song title is "Tell Me Where Is Fancy Bred." On the Twelfth Night written by Shakespeare, there is a song title is "Oh Mistress Mine, Where Are You Roaming?" Next one, the song in Love's Labour's Lost by Shakespeare. The song's title is "When Daisies Pied and Violets Blew." Uh, these are some songs. So we have. So there were longer love poems were there. So in addition to the short and sweet lyrics, there were a few longer narrative love poems. Marlowe's Hero and Leander was left unfinished. It was completed by Chapman. Following this lead, Shakespeare wrote Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. All the three are erotic poems full of sensuous beauty. They were very popular, though frowned upon by the Puritans. There was other poetry. We must talk about it. Though love poetry was by far the most popular, there were so many other kinds of poetry composed in this era. For example, historical, philosophical, religious, moral, satirical, pastoral. Of these, only the historical and satirical deserve some notice. The historical school includes William Warner, Daniel, and Drayton, these three people. They were all inspired by patriotic motives to glorify their country. And here, Warner's here Warner's Albion's England. Warner written the poem Albion's England. It is a huge poem in 14ers. It is a history of England from Noah, Noah, Noah to Elizabeth. Yes, there were Daniel's civil wars of York, Lancaster, and Triton's poem The Barons Wars, England's heroical epistles, the Ballad of Agincourt, and the enormous uh, Polioblion in 30 books complete the list of historical poems here. The best of these is the Ballad of Agincourt, is one of the most famous poem. The satirical school consists of Bishop Hall, Lodge, Marston, Turner, and Donne. Satire had been attempted before Spenser in Gascoigne's Still Glass, but it was not followed up until towards the end of the 16th century. These satires are coarse in matter and harsh and rugged in versification. Donne's satires are the best, though most of his poetical work was done in the reign of James. He has a romantic vein by virtue of which he belongs to the Elizabethans. Of the remaining kinds of poetry, the philosophical school is best represented by Lord Bacon and Sir Henry Wotton. The former's poem on life and the latter's on the character of happy life can be read in Palgrave's, the writer Palgrave's Golden Treasury. So here we completed the poetry in the Elizabethan age. The next one, that prose, so we will discuss it after break, short break. So dear friends, today we are going to continue after the break, Elizabethan prose. Yes, the prose in the Elizabethan era we are going to start now. So the prose of the Elizabethan period is not so brilliant as its poetry or drama. Historically, it reached in this period the middle stage of its development. In thought, diction and style, it is nearer to modern times than the older prose, say the prose of Millery's Mortality Arthur. But still, it is not modern prose. Poetry and romance were heavy in the air and clung to its prose. Thus, most of the Elizabethan prose is poetic, and except in a few cases, colored with romantic conceits. Again, stimulated as it was by foreign models, classical, Italian, French, and Spanish. These models made available through translations. Much of this prose is rather juvenile, artificial, and conventional. It is also, with very few exceptions, verbose. This was natural in the circumstances of the age. It was an age abounding in vitality. The resources of the language had increased vastly through translations. What wonder that prose, which is not subject to the restrictions of verse, should overflow with verse? Among the translations before Spenser, the two that had most influence were North's Golden Book of Marcus Aurelius and Painter's Palace of Pleasure. Painter's book is a collection of tales mainly from the classics, and the Italian of Boccaccio and Bandello. This proved a prolific source of plots to the Elizabethan dramatists, including Shakespeare, who took from it the story of Romeo and Juliet. North's Golden Book was a translation of the Dial of Princes written by a Spanish ecclesiastic, Guevara, Guevara, a translation of a shorter version of this same book by Lord Berners had appeared as early as 1534. Its highly elaborate antithetical and epigrammatical style had an irresistible attraction for aristocratic circles, and the book was reprinted many times. It was this book which is supposed to have inspired John Lilly's Euphues, Euphues, and this book was a great book of ornate prose in English. So here we are going to start about John Lilly. We are going to discuss about John Lilly. So the first part of the book, Euphues, Euphues, its subtitle is The Anatomy of Wheat. Yes, and the first part of the book appeared in 1579, followed by the second part, Euphues, and its title was And His England in 1580. And the book is a romance or romantic novel. If we are not too strict in using the term, for the novel proper was to come much later. Euphues was a rich and handsome Athenian youth, visits Naples. There falls in love with Lucilla, Lucilla. Lucilla was the sweetheart of his friend Philotas, Philautus. The friends quarrel between Lucilla. The friends quarrel, but Lucilla jilts Euphues in favor of a third and very inferior suitor. The satire on women is obvious. For the rest, the book is didactic, containing aphoristic reflections on education and morals. The second part is dedicated to the ladies and gentlewomen of England. The ladies and gentlewomen of England are highly praised for their beauty and virtue by way of making amends for the attack on them in the first. Euphues, Euphues, now transported to England, lavishes high praise on the country, her people, queen, and especially her universities. Although the book has story interest, some realism, and a good deal of aphoristic wisdom, it was not its matter so much as its curious manner which fascinated Lilly's contemporaries. The book was an immense and immediate success and went through many editions during a short time. And here we find that euphemism has its point, for example, wheat sparkle novelty, and it is no wonder its appeal was so widespread. But to the more refined modern tastes, its interminable and monotonous antithesis and parallels are tedious. So this was the talking about Euphues. So ahead there was another personality. The personality name was Philip Sidney, who was contributed for the development of prose in the era titled the Elizabethan Age. The conceit of quite another kind of invented by Sir Philip Sidney in his text Arcadia, and it is written about the same time when John Lilly wrote Euphues, but Arcadia was published posthumously in 1590. It was inspired by a Greek romance of Heliodorus of Syria, 3rd century. And Heliodorus, Heliodorus, yes, who was the author of the book Ethiopica, Aethiopica, and this book, the book Ethiopica, is a pastoral romance which Sidney wrote as a, sorry. So this the book Arcadia was a pastoral romance which Sidney wrote as a pastime, Pastime, to entertain his sister, the Countess of Pembroke. It is a fantastic story of kings and courtiers, princes and princesses in a land of enchanting pastoral beauty, the Greek Arcadia. In this utopia, the highest ideals of love, friendship, courage, and knightly courtesy prevail. But again, as in the case of Euphues, it is the style which arrests attention. It is euphemism with a difference and may well be called Arcadianism. It is highly poetic, the poetry being heightened by extra refinement or preciousness, and figures of speech called pathetic fallacy. There were other writers of fictions, prose in this era. We must talk about them. So there were Thomas Lodge, Green, Nash, Delany. So sterile as both Lily and Sidney were as novelists, but there was some advance in storytelling was made by Laws and Green. Both Laws and Green were the imitators of John Lilly. Laws wrote the romance. The title was Rosalinde, Rosalynde. This book was actually described in its subtitle as Euphues' Golden Legacy, supplied to the plot to Shakespeare. It means this Rosalinda's plot we find in the play As You Like It by Shakespeare. After that, Rosalinda's plot also we find in Pandosto, written by Green, and The Witness Tale also. But real advance in the art of fiction was made by Thomas Nash. Thomas Nash, Picarsky romance, Jack Wilton or The Unfortunate Traveler, is regarded by some as the first Elizabethan novel. The Picarsky novel or novel dealing with the adventures of a rogue originated in Spain. Rogue means Picaro. Must we must keep in our mind. Thomas Nash's book narrates the adventures of Jack Wilton. Jack Wilton is a page in the army of Henry VIII. It is a complete departure from the euphemistic romances of Thomas Lodge and Thomas Green and is altogether the most delightful thing in Elizabethan fiction. Curiously enough, however, Nash was surpassed in popularity by a much less gifted writer, Thomas Delany. Thomas Delany wrote stories such as Jack of Newbury, Thomas of Reading, The Gentle Craft. So these are the stories written by Thomas Delany, and these are more in line with the latter novel of the 18th century than those of his greater contemporaries. The secret lies in his subjects as well as in his style. Instead of dealing with the far fetched or exotic, he concentrated on English life and depicted it in a plain, natural style. He was a weaver by trade and kept close to the life of the artisan. Uh, Thomas Nash Gentle Craft is all about shoemakers. It is the most famous of histories. It supplied the plot for Thomas Decker's Shoemaker's Holiday. And there was another form of prose that was a pamphlet writing. So there were pamphlet writers in this era. But the form of prose writing that was peculiar to the time was the pamphlet. Pamphlets were written on all kinds of subjects and were especially used in controversies, literary, religious, and political. The most famous of these, the Martin Marprelate controversy. It centered around episcopacy of government of the church by bishops. The Puritans were opposed to the institution of bishops, and an anonymous champion of their cause, who called himself Marprelate, published a series of pamphlets containing ribald attacks upon episcopacy. The bishops replied in the same terms, enlisting on their side such gifted writers were there as John Lilly, Green, Laws, and so much. So Thomas Nash was the most vigorous pamphleteer of the time. The controversy, which began in 1588, ended with the seizure of the secret press of the Martinist and the hanging of one Penry in 1593, but the identity of Martin remains a mystery to this day. So there was a first pamphleteer whose name is Thomas Hooker. So we must focus on his written work. So it was an unseemly controversy. It is of little literary interest except insofar as it exercised the powers of English prose in the language of broad satirical humor and invective. But it had one important result. It provoked Richard Hooker. Richard Hooker was a country divine to write his monumental book. The title of the book was Of the Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. And this book is a sober, dignified, and closely reasoned defense of the Church of England and its episcopal government. It is not mere theology, it is theology broad based on philosophy. The Puritans objected to episcopacy on the ground that it had no sanction in the scripture. To this, Hooker replied that the scripture does not, cannot provide for all matters, and God's word has to be supplemented by reason in matters not covered by it. His is a plea for tolerance, understanding, and freedom. The Puritans' literal interpretation of the Bible will tie the Christian hand and foot and make the church regulate not only the religious life of the people but their civil life as well. The Puritan position implied the subordination of the king and civil authority to the church, which would be tyranny too terrible to contemplate. There was another pamphlet writer, mm, was uh, Francis Bacon, talking about him. His lifetime was 1561 to 1626, and we find he wrote famous book titled Essays, and the first edition published of this book in 1597. It contains 10 essays which were enlarged later to 58. The essays are what Bacon calls them in the subtitle. What is the subtitle of this book? Counsels Civil and Moral. Yes, this is the subtitle. This is the subtitle. They are full of practical wisdom designed to help in the successful conduct of life. It is frankly worldly wisdom without any pretense of idealism. Indeed, the advice at places is plainly Machiavellian. So this is a nice book. So ahead we find that it is very nice. So this book is very grand, written by Francis Bacon, and we must we have already discussed about him. So Francis Bacon uses words in their Latin meaning, and his sentences are marked by balance and antithesis. The title Essays may have been suggested by Montaigne's Montaignes, Essays, Essays. This book, Essays, Essays by Montaigne, had appeared as early as 1580, and it is not translated in English till 1603. So, however, there is no similarity between the two. Which books? Essays written by Francis Bacon and Essays written by Montaigne. So the Frenchman is preeminently personal and discursive, while Bacon is impersonal and aphoristic. There is only one essay of Bacon's, that on gardens, which is a personal and reveals his delight in gardens. So there was this one, and there was another work written by Francis Bacon. The title of the book was A New Atlantis. It is just another utopia. It describes an imaginary Iceland in the Pacific inhabited by scholars and scientists. Though the most interesting feature of this Iceland is Solomon's house, which is dedicated to the pursuit of scientific research. The book, which was published incomplete after Bacon's death, is really an offshoot of his philosophical speculations. His principal philosophical works, it means Francis Bacon, uh, works are Advancement of Learning, which is written in English language, and Novum Organum, Novum, and Organum, Organum. Yes, this work is written in Latin language. So, in the text, Advancement of Learning, the author discusses the various methods of advancing knowledge, which he divides into history, poetry, and philosophy. And in the book Novum Organum, he expounds the inductive method of acquiring accurate knowledge. That's to say, observation and experiment and proceeding from the particular to the general. Thus, Bacon may be said to have laid the foundation of modern science. We must talk about it. So, there was a literary criticism in this era. We must talk about it. It is very important point in the Elizabethan era. So, we find that Wilson's Art of Rhetoric in 1553, yes, is the starting of literary criticism in this era. In the great Elizabethan period, quite a number of critical works appeared, the most important of which is Philip Sidney's An Apology of Poetry. They have no originality, being based on Italian and French critical literature, which was itself derived from ancients. In a very uncritical fashion, they uphold classical theories regardless of their suitability to the national genius. The writers contradict themselves in actual practice. The questions that most concern and critics were morality and classical meters. So it is very important. And we find Stephen Gosson, who had failed as a dramatist, attacked all poetry and plays in his book School of Abuse, which appeared in 1579. And this Puritan attack provoked Philip Sidney's An Apology for Poetry. And so, this is an eloquent and delightful defense of poetry. It ranks with Shelley's latter essay on the same subject, and it was very nice. So, here we think that very nice critical works you will find. And there was other question that dominated criticism was that of adopting classical meters in English poetry. It was an exercise in futility, but it held in its grip the best brains of the time. Sidney, Spencer, Gabriel Harvey, and so many others toyed with the idea, which developed into a craze. Discourse of English Poetry by Weber, Webb. After that, we find Art of English Poetry by Puttenham. After that, there we find Observations in the Art of English Poetry by Campion. And the last one, Defense of Rhyme by Daniel. So these are the works, uh, works based on criticism in this era. Now there is a historical literature. We must talk about it. It is very important. The patriotic impulse of the this period, means Elizabethan period, produced many chronicles such as those of Hall, Holinshed, and Stowe. They are mere catalogues of events written in ornate style of a little distinction. Holinshed written the book titled Chronicle. Yes, it was so much popular. And it because it is used by William Shakespeare. It's used by William Shakespeare for his plays. The only noteworthy historical work is Raleigh. Yes, History of the World. The book History of the World, written by Raleigh, Raleigh, English at a philosophical survey. of events. It is written in the moderately ornate and forceful style and contains some passages of splendid eloquence, including the famous one on the death. And there was another literature on travel, which was just very important related with the Elizabethan age. So the same patriotic feeling that produced the chronicles was also, but after that we find this patriotic feeling also influence on the literature of travel in the Elizabethan era. It touched to the quick by the French JIB that the English played safe in every venture. Richard Hakluyt, Richard Hakluyt, Hakluit. He was a chaplain to the English ambassador in France, and he determined to wipe off this national reproach. He collected all reports of English adventurers on the high seas and published his famous compilation with the lengthy title. And the title was so much used title. I think that I must read the title written by Richard Hakluyt. Richard Richard Hakluyt Hakluit. Now I am going to read the title. It is very big title of the text. Yes, listen title. Starting double inter comma. The principal navigations, voyages and discoveries of the English nation made by sea or over land to the most remote and farthest distant quarters of the earth at any time within the compass of these 1500 years. Double inverted comma compared. This is the most longest title of the text in the history of English literature, we can say, because this book includes 3 volumes, and it is so the most comprehensive account we have of English voyages or travel, of discovery and exploration. Hakluyt work was continued in the next reign of by Samuel Purchas. Yes, Purchas. He wrote the text. The title of the text is Hakluyt's posthumous or Purchas's pilgrims. So here we have seen the literature of travel. The last one is also translations. The translation study here we find. No survey of Elizabethan prose would be complete without reference to the work of translators, because those translators open the reaches of the ancient and modern literatures to English eyes. The most scholarly as well as the most prolific translator of the age was Philemon Holland. Philemon, Philemon, Holland, Holland. So Holland, he went straight to his originals and translated Livy, Pliny, Plutarch, Suetonis, Suetonis. So he translated the book Moralia, Moralia, written by Plutarch. But the most famous and by far the most popular translations are Lives of the Noble, the book Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans, written by Sir, written by Plutarch, which is translated Sir Thomas North, and the book Essays, written by Montaigne, which is translated by John Florio. The English of the two translators translations, especially that of the Lives, Lives, that book also translated, and it's so fluent, idiomatic, and vigorous that they read like original masterpieces. This and their content made them the most popular reading of their day. Shakespeare used Plutarch, translated by North, for his Roman plays and borrowed not only the stories but sometimes the very words. The irresistible charm of Montaigne inspired the writing of the personal essay, which in the 18th century was established as a new form of prose literature. So here we discuss prose literature, and very nice. But the next chapter is very fantastic chapter, and we must talk about it. That chapter, that is the Elizabethan age and the development, progress, and the richness of the form. The title of the form is drama, play, and in Elizabethan era, drama was succeeded so much. So a short little break. So we will continue it. Yes. So, dear friends, now we are talking about the drama. So, before starting about the drama in the Elizabethan age, I want to talk about drama before Shakespeare. So, at the beginning, firstly, we will talk about drama. Yes, so far we have said nothing of the drama. Its consideration had its consideration had to be postponed for good reasons. For one thing, the drama is a later growth. For another, the links in the chain of its development are not quite as clear as in the case of poetry and prose. Therefore, its period-wise treatment will give a disjointed, in order that the student may have a continuous and coherent view of its origin and development. It has been considered advisable to make at this stage a rapid survey of the whole field of the drama from its earliest beginnings to the point where Shakespeare took it up. So, before starting the drama in the Elizabethan age, we must talk about medieval drama, the drama between 12th and 15th centuries. So, the drama arose in England as in other Catholic countries of Europe in the attempts of the clergy to teach the masses the tenets of the Christian faith by dramatizing the services of the church at Christmas and Easter. Ahead, we find that the plays were in Latin, the language was of the liturgy, the actors were clergy. The actors were clergy, clergy. Such scriptural plays in Latin are known to have been performed as early as the 12th century. They were first given in the church, Latin in the churchyard. They became very popular after the institution by the Pope of the festival of Corpus Christi early in the 14th century. The sets of plays which were given separately at Christmas and Easter were now combined into one cycle performed on the occasion. Their language now was English, and the plays had an admixture of comic elements to make them more entertaining. As the churchyards could not hold the growing crowds, the performance of the plays was taken over by the towns. As the Corpus Christi festival was celebrated with a pageant or procession, these plays were given on moving platforms which themselves came to be called pageants. Pageants. They were not like the procession of moving platforms during the Ram Leela celebrations in India. The whole of the scripture story, from the birth of Christ to his crucifixion and ascension, was enacted in a cycle of plays called miracles or mysteries. A distinction is sometimes made between mysteries and miracles. Mysteries denoting plays dealing with the life of Christ, and the latter and miracles those dealing with the life of the saints. Mysteries deals with life of Christ, Jesus Christ, and miracles deals with lives of the saints. This distinction is true of France, not of England, where all plays were indiscriminately called miracles. The complete cycle of plays was spread over several days. Each guild or trade union of the town made itself responsible for the production of the play appropriate to it. For example, the play of the flood would be assigned to the guild of shipwrights, the adoration of the Magi who presented the infant Christ with gold and jewelry to the guild of goldsmiths, and so on. The miracles were all established by the 15th century and were very popular. Four cycles of these plays, besides minor ones, have been preserved. Named after their town, they are cycles of York, cycles of Chester, cycles of Coventry, and cycles of Wakefield. The York collection, the biggest collection, the York cycle, consisted 48 plays. These plays by unknown authors are written in stanzas of doggerel verse. They are simple though crude in style. However, one comes upon scenes both of extreme pathos and of humor. A good example of the pathetic is the play of Abraham and Isaac, in which Abraham offers to sacrifice his son Isaac, but the anonymous writers show the greatest originality in the interpolated scenes of humor. Two scenes in the Wakefield collection are the most amusing. The one shows the lively quarrel between Noah and his shrewish wife, who has to be beaten into submission before the ark can proceed. In the nativity play, the other is a farcical comedy. Mac steals a sheep belonging to the shepherds who are going to visit the baby Christ. A search follows, and the sheep is discovered in a cradle in Mac's house. Mac's wife pretends to have been just delivered of a child. One of the shepherds thereupon proceeds to offer a present to the baby, who is discovered to be no other than the stolen sheep. Now, next one are moralities. The second stage in the development of the drama was reached in moral plays or moralities. This grew up side by side with the miracles in the 15th century. The earliest extant morality, the Castle of Preservance, dates back to early 15th century. The morality was a sort of allegory of human life, showing man struggling between good and evil. The characters were abstractions, personifications of virtue and vices. The early moralities like Mankind, Hick's Corner, and others are awfully dull. The only exception, the only exception is Everyman. Everyman is so good that it has been revived on the modern stage in both England and America. Everyman is summoned to God by death. He seeks company. He visits one after another fellowship, means friends, kindred means relations, and goods means earthly possessions, but in vain. He at last remembers good deeds who willingly accompanies him. The moral is obvious. Now there is Renaissance drama. We must talk about it. With the advent of the Renaissance and the triumph of Protestantism, the miracles declined. However, the morality survived. and were used to reflect either humanism or the spirit of the reformed religion. In other words, the moralities became either secular or religious. Magnificence, written by Skelton, is the earliest example of secular morality. It was aimed at the extravagances of Henry VIII. Others to follow of the same class, such as the Four Elements and Wheat and Science. The Four Elements, and second book is Wheat and Science. Both books traced the importance of knowledge and denounced ignorance. The reformers used morality to propagate their own views in such plays as Lindsay's satire of the Three Estates in Scotland, King John, written by Bishop Bell in England. The Three Estates satirized by Lindsay are the clergy, the nobility, and the citizens, the chief target being the Romish priest. Bell mixes history with his morality and in doing so falsifies history. John is the worst king of England. He is shown as a great king who is maligned by the church because he had repudiated the Pope. This morality anticipates Shakespeare's King John. The secular morality took a long step forward when it developed into a kind of play called the interlude. The most prolific writer of these interludes was John Haywood. John Haywood was a musician in the court of Henry VIII. His aim was simply to amuse and not to moralize. His most famous interlude is the Four P's. First one is Palmer, second one is Pardoner, third one is Apothecary, and fourth one is a peddler. Haywood discarded the abstractions of the moralities and introduced in their place human characters taken from contemporary life. Further, by avoiding moralizing and concentrating on pure amusement, his new and very merry interludes prepared by the way for comedy. Now, the classical influence on the drama. The next point, classical influence on the drama. Though humanism had used the morality for its own purposes early in the 16th century, it was not till 1550 that the classics made their full impact upon English drama. The first English comedy was Ralph Roister Doister, written by Nicholas Woodall. Nicholas Woodall was the headmaster of Eton. It was first acted about 1553. It was modelled on the Latin comedy of Plautus and Terence. It divided into five acts. It was not pure imitation. Some of the characters are borrowed from the classics, others are taken straight from English life. Ralph was a foolish braggart. Matthew Mary Greek was the mischievously funny servant. They are stock characters of Latin comedy. Dame Constance was the heroine. Her two maids are contemporary English types. The fun and laughter arise from Mary Greek's changing the punctuation of Ralph's love letter. Ralph is beaten and driven away by Constance and her maids. Good luck, good luck estranged from his fiancée by false reports is reconciled to her, and the play is written in rhymed verse. Another and even better comedy, or rather farce, that is a Gammer Gurton's Needle. Was produced a little later of Cambridge. There is nothing classical about it except its regular construction and division into acts and scenes. It is a farce of rustic English life. Gammer Gurton loses her needle which is supposed to have been stolen by a neighbor. The search that follows leads to noisy quarrels, and the whole village is in an uproar until the Dame's man, and the man name was Hodge, Hodge. Hodge screams, and the needle is found sticking in his pants. These two, as the precursors of later English comedy, they did not contribute much to the progress of the drama beyond separating the comic element from the serious. Real advance was made in the first tragedy, Gorbuduk, Gorbuduc. Its subtitle is Ferrex and Porex. It acted in 1561. It is written by two lawyers, Sackville and Norton. The writers were inspired by the Roman tragedian Seneca, Seneca. His tragedies are rhetorical and fit for declamation rather than acting on the stage. There is a chorus who explains the theme of the play. There is very little action on the stage. All action takes place off the stage and is simply reported. The story is of unrelieved gloom, full of violent and monstrous crime, bloodshed, and horror. King Gorboduc abdicates in favor of his sons Ferrex and Porrex, who immediately start a war. So it was one of the nice book. There is another one that the advance was not pursued immediately. It took about 25 years before effective use of blank verse was made in Kidd's Spanish Tragedy. Thomas Kidd was written the book titled Spanish Tragedy, and Tembulian written by Christopher Marlowe. But in speaking of Kidd and Marlowe, we are anticipating. We have still to see what the state of drama was during the years 1550 to 1590. It must not be supposed that the three plays referred to above and conveniently called the first comedy, the first farce, the first tragedy were the only plays produced during these years. There were others which testified to the intense dramatic activity of this period. That's why this period is also one of the most important. And here we find that there was the city and the first theater called, yes, the first theater called simply the theater, and the first theater was built in 1576. And there is another school which was so much famous, that is University Wits. Towards the close of this transitional period appear a group of highly gifted writers who at one bound, as it were, pulled the drama out of the sphere of childish experiment into that of art. The members of this group were all or almost all university men, and from a playful phrase applied to them at the time are known as university wits. And in the university wits there were writers such as John Lilly, George Pillay, Robert Greene, Thomas Lodge, Thomas Nash, Keed, Christopher Marlowe. They were the real founders of the great Elizabethan drama. They were the immediate predecessors as well as contemporaries of Shakespeare. Lilly, who made his name with his Euphues, Euphues, belongs more to the history of prose than to that of drama. His plays in euphuistic prose written for the entertainment of the court. His plays are mass, like comedies on classical subjects. For example, Compass, Campaspe, Endymion, Love's metamorphosis. The dramatic element in them is slight, but they are highly artistic with the charm of fancy, wit, and satire, far removed from the crudities of the early comedies. They prepared the way for romantic comedy of Shakespeare. After that, there was a writer, Pile, Pwle. His plays show a great variety of subjects, for example, classical, romantic, biblical, historical. The arrangement of Paris is classical. David and Bathsheba is biblical. Edward I is historical. And the old wives' tale is romantic. So Pele is no more dramatic than John Lilly, but Pele is as charming in his verse as Lilly is in his prose. The blank verse of Pele is sweet and supple. It is a distinct advance on that of Gorbuduc. Green, Lodge, and Nash form a more or less distinct group of subgroup of playwrights who wrote for the popular stage. Of these, Green alone is remarkable as a dramatist. In Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay and James Foe, Green sketched charming pictures of pure, self-sacrificing women that anticipate the romantic heroines of Shakespeare, such as Rosalind, Viola, Imogen. Lodge and Nash were mediocre as dramatists, though they excelled in other fields. Both of them wrote poems, pamphlets, and prose fiction. The student remembers Lodge as the writer of the novel Rosalind, which Shakespeare refashioned in As You Like It. Thomas Nash distinguished himself as a satirist. Thomas Kidd and Christopher Marlowe. While all the made real contribution to the development of the drama, but Kidd and Marlowe did not supply thrilling action demanded by the public. This was supplied by Kidd and Marlowe. The point is that this was supplied by Kidd and Marlowe. Whether Kidd's Spanish tragedy or Marlowe's Tamburlaine came first, it is difficult to say. What is certain is that both made a hit about the same time, 1586 or 1587. The Spanish tragedy written by Thomas Kidd, which outdoes Seneca as a horror play, was a sensation. Its popularity was not only immediate but lasted till the end of the century or even beyond. The literature of the time is full of references to it. Ben Jonson refers to it in his Everyman in his Humor. The play is sensational melodrama whose theme is revenge. It opens with the revelation made by the ghost of Don Andrea that he has been foully murdered by Balthazar and calling for revenge. This story forms the framework of the action that happens. Ahead we find Christopher Marlowe. The other important personality who developed this school of university wits, the name of that person is Christopher Marlowe. He was the son of shoemaker of Canterbury. He was born in 1564. His lifetime is 1564 to 1930. He was educated at the King's School, Canterbury, and at Cambridge. He was accused of atheism and lived the loose life of a bohemian. He died as the result of a drunken brawl at the age of 29. His major works are the four plays: first, Tamburlaine; second, Dr. Faustus; third, The Jew of Malta; and fourth and last one, Edward II. These are the major four works. The minor are something. There are two minor works written by Christopher Marlowe. First is the massacre of Paris, and second one is Dido, Queen of Carthage. And there was one non-dramatic poem written by Christopher Marlowe. And the title of that poem is Hero and Leander. Hero and Leander. So the heroes of the his plays are each consumed by a burning passion which leads to their doom. In Tamburlaine, this passion is thirst for power. That's why he became one of the famous dramatists. There was another play, Dr. Faustus. It is the story of a man coming to grief by his unbridled thirst for knowledge and power. He sells his soul to the devil in exchange for supreme knowledge and the power that knowledge gives. For 24 years, Dr. Faustus echoes Marlowe's own ambition for unlimited knowledge and power. There was his another play, Tamburlaine, and this play is shorter, but it is so much popular today also. It has some powerful passages of poetry, notably Helen passage about referred to and that in the last scene of anguish before the doctor approaching damnation. The similarity between Dr. Faustus and Marlowe gives another interest to the play. The pathetic epilogue spoken by the chorus on the terrible fate of Dr. Faustus acquires additional piquancy in the play Tamburlaine. There was another play, The Jew of Malta. In this play, passion is greed of riches as well as hatred of enemies. The Jew, whose name is Barabbas, Barabbas is ruined by Christians, and in revenge, he contrives incredible cruelties until he falls into a cauldron of boiling water which he had prepared to destroy his enemies. This is real horror play, a fit match for Tamburlaine. The last one is Edward II. In this play, Marlowe descends from these superhuman heights to reality and history. It is the first great historical play. It is pointed the way to Richard II, King John, and other historical plays written by Shakespeare. It is a real attempt at the interpretation of history, studies, character, and dramatic qualities. Ahead, we find that Marlowe's usual lyrical eloquence shows itself in the speeches of the king and particularly in the great speech of Mortimer. And that's why Christopher Marlowe really became grand. And now we will start about the grand personality. That is, the grand personality is nobody, William Shakespeare. And it is a huge lecture. It is a grand lecture. It is a miraculous lecture. We are going to continue talking about Shakespeare. What? There is no word. William Shakespeare was a grand personality, is a grand personality, will be grand personality. He is the brightest star in the all stars in entire world literature. He was famous, he is famous, he will be famous. There is no such word for his works and his creation. For this grand personality was born on 23rd of April 1564 at Stratford on Avon. Stratford on Avon is a village in Warwickshire. His father was a prosperous grain dealer whose fortunes whose fortunes declined after some time, and Shakespeare, who attended the local grammar school, had had to give up his studies at the age of 13 or 14 in order to help in the family business. He made a hasty marriage at 18. He had three children, two daughters, and a son. He had three children. Shakespeare had three children, including two daughters and a son. The name of Shakespeare's wife is Anne Hathaway, and she is 8 years senior than him. It is probable his relations with her were not happy actually. There is a tradition that he was caught poaching deer and rabbits in Sir Thomas Lucy's park at uh, Charlecote and was beaten up. Oh my god. This incident, it is supposed, drove him from his native village to seek his livelihood elsewhere. So, be that as it may, he drifted to London in or about 1586 and remained cut off from home and family for about 10 years. Little is known about his early life in London. He appears to have been attracted to the stage and is said to have begun as a holder of visitors' horses. Later, he found employment as an actor and is said to have acted the ghost in Hamlet and Adam in As You Like It. That is the most important IMP point. The first notice of Shakespeare as a dramatist occurs in Green's pamphlet, A Groat's Worth of Wheat, in 1592. Green denounced him as an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide supposes he is as able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute John's factotum is in his own conceit the only Shakespeare in a country. So in the pamphlet, A Groat's Worth of Wheat, Green praised Shakespeare, and this reference in Green's pamphlet is taken by Shakespeare and used in his play Henry VI. Green's attack was provoked by jealousy of Shakespeare's great popularity as a refashioner of old plays. There were three plays on Henry VI, part 1, part 2, and part 3. So that was the great. Thus encouraged, Shakespeare began producing all kinds of play, then popular and soon became the most popular playwright of his day. The theatrical company to which he was attached at the time, known as Earl of Leicester's players, later became Lord Chamberlains, and finally, after Queen Elizabeth's death in 1603, Shakespeare's company performed at various theatres. First one the theatre, second one the Rose, third one the Curtain. After that there was a famous theatre which name is Globe Theatre, built in 1599. As Shakespeare's prosperity grew, he became a part owner of the Globe and Blackfriars theatres, with which the whole of his remaining professional career was identified. Shakespeare's dramatic career covers roughly a period of 20 years from 1591 to 1611. During this period, he wrote 37 plays, besides two narrative love poems and a large number of sonnets. The love poems are Venus and Adonis, first one, and second one is The Rape of Lucrece. Both poems dedicated to the young and brilliant Earl of Southampton, who must have rewarded him with a munificent gift. In any case, Shakespeare was introduced to the highest circles of the court, the nobility, and the scholars. Shakespeare's son, named Hamnet, Hamnet, died in August 1596. Shakespeare was present at his burial at Stratford. From this time on, he visited Stratford frequently, and with his growing prosperity, the financial position of his family improved. He persuaded his father to apply for a coat of arms, which was granted. Thus, though not born a gentleman, he became one by inheritance. He bought in 1597 New Place, the largest house in Stratford. He bought other real estate in Stratford and in London. About 1611, he bade farewell to the stage and he retired to Stratford, where he lived the quiet life of a country gentleman till he died on 23 April 1660 of a fever contracted from a bout of drinking with his guest Ben Jonson and Drayton. There is no contemporary biography of Shakespeare, and what little we know about his life is the result of patient and industrious investigation of devoted scholars during the last 3.5 centuries. Despite many controversial points, Sidney Lee's monumental Life of Shakespeare is the most authoritative source of information for us. Now we must talk about his plays. The two long poems and the sonnets of Shakespeare have been considered elsewhere in this book. Beautiful as they are mere effusions of youth, and if Shakespeare had written nothing more, they alone could not have been the foundation of his lasting greatness. Luckily, his dramatic instinct drew him to the stage where he was to win his laurels. The drama was at the time the most popular form of entertainment, and the demand for plays so great that writers for the stage were driven to touching up old plays instead of writing new ones. It was also a common practice for playwrights to collaborate in revising an old play. Shakespeare began as a reviser of old plays, seems to have thus collaborated with Marlowe and Keat. The A rough chronology of Shakespeare's plays has been worked out from external as well as internal evidence. External evidence consists of reference to the plays in diaries and memoranda of constant contemporaries. The most important document of this kind is Pallady's Tamia, Wit's Treasury, written by Francis Mears Amiarius. In this volume, Mears reviews all English authors since Chaucer up to his own day, as Plautus and Seneca are accounted the best for comedy and tragedy among the Latins. So Shakespeare among the English is the most excellent in both kinds for the stage. There is no play called Love's Labour's Won, and some ingenious critics have identified it with All Is Well That Ends Well. So, if we want to divide Shakespeare's play So we find there are four periods: early period, middle period, three periods: early period, middle period, and late period. The duration of early period is 1590 to 1596. The duration of middle period is 1596 to 1608, and the late period is 1608 to 1630. So in early period, he wrote the plays Henry VI in three parts, Richard III, Richard II, King John. There were comedies like Love's Labour's Lost, Comedies of Errors, Two Gentlemen of Verona, A Midsummer Night's Dream. There was tragedies like Titus Andronicus, Romeo and Juliet. In the middle period, he wrote histories. Henry IV in two parts. After that, Henry V. After that, comedies in this era, in this period, The Merchant of Venice, Taming of the Shrew, Merry Wives of Windsor, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, Troilus and Cressida, All Is Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure. The tragedies wrote in this era: Julius Caesar, Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, Lear, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Timon of Athens, and at the last period, he wrote Pericles, which was incomplete, Cymbeline, Winter's Tale, The Tempest, Henriette, and The Two Noble Kinsmen. And Pericles and Two Noble Kinsmen completed by other writer. So these were the so these are the works which Shakespeare wrote in these three eras, and so much criticized by various writers, various critics, and especially he presented the human life's philosophy in his place. But the point which we cannot reduce, the point is the stage in the Elizabethan age. As Shakespeare's plays were written to be acted and acted on a particular stage, we should always have a mental picture of that stage while reading any of his plays. The Elizabethan theatre was a round or octagonal building enclosing a courtyard which was open to the sky. The stage was a rectangular platform projecting from one side into the courtyard. On the bare floor in front and on the either side of this platform stood the common people or groundlings who paid a penny or so for admission. The better class who paid more sat on seats in tiers of galleries running all round the above the other, as in a modern circus, the uppermost being covered with a thatched roof slanting inward. The Elizabethan stage was a primitive affair as compared with our own, and you will find the Elizabethan stage was the best one for the presentation of plays. But there were some dramatists who also tried to compose plays in this era. So it is our duty, it must, those all dramatists we must try to read. So after the greatness of Shakespeare, we find that due to the greatness of Shakespeare, it has so eclipsed his contemporaries and successors in drama that it is only by an effort that we remember them and their plays. So actually, who were there? So Ben Jonson was one of the. So the lifetime of Ben Jonson is 1573 to 1637. He was the greatest of the group of writers for the public theatre outside Shakespeare was Ben Jonson. As Marlowe had been Shakespeare's greatest rival in his earlier career, so was Ben Jonson in his latter. He had a varied and adventurous career. He was educated at the famous Westminster School, and though he did not go up to the university, he was honored by both the universities. Hello. So here in the post-Shakespearean drama, you can say that, or the dramatists, those are contemporaries of William Shakespeare. And talking about Ben Jonson, I have already told that he was born at Westminster. He educated at Westminster School. His father died before Johnson's birth, and the boy adopted the trade of his stepfather. And bricklaying did not satisfy him for long, and he became a soldier serving in the Low Countries. From this, he turned to acting and writing plays, engaging himself both as actor and playwright with the Lord Admiral's company. At first, he had little success. The discouragement he encountered then must have done much to soar a temper that was not any time. Talking about Ben Jonson ahead, that on the accession of James I in 1603, there arose at the court a new fashion for picaresque pigeons known as masks. Johnson turned his energies to supplying this demand with great success. After this period, Johnson commanded great good fortune. During this time, his best work was produced. In 1617, he was created poet to the king. Especially, he was become the close of James' reign. He saw the James' reign, and he is undisputed ruler of English literature. Johnson's favorite haunt was the Mermaid Tavern, where he reigned as dictator over a younger literary generation. Johnson was buried in Westminster Abbey, and there was written or placed the epitaph over Ben Jonson. Actually, Ben Jonson wrote numerous works such as comedies, tragedies, masques, lyrics. These works are widely varying merit, but all of them, his Timber, Timber. It is a kind of commonplace book. It is of considerable interest for its critical comments on literature. It shows the unity of aim underlying his writing. Johnson was the first great English neoclassic. Like John Donne, he was in revolt against the artistic principles of his contemporaries, and he sought in the classics a cure for the uncontrolled romantic exuberance of Elizabethan literature. In all branches of his writing, he is the conscious artist and reformer. He works on clearly defined principles. To him, the chief function of literature was to instruct. His plays divide conveniently into comedies and tragedies. For Johnson, true to his classical models, did not combine the two. In his comedies, he aimed to return to the controlled, satirical, realistic comedy of the classical dramatists. His main concern was with the drawing of character and the drawing of character and the description of character. You can say that. So, his creations are important because they introduce the comedy of humors. His creations, his plays portrays, his works portrays the individual as dominated by one marked characteristics. Many of his characters or types. That's why he became one of the best dramatists after Shakespeare. His earlier comedies were Every Man in His Humor, Every Man Out of His Humor, Cynthia's Revels, The Poetaster, and all these plays show his ingenuity of plot, his hearty humor, his wit, and they are full of vivacity and fun. Every Man in His Humor is the greatest work. The middle group of comedies, such as Wolfon or the Fox, Epicene or the Silent Women, The Alchemist, Bartholomew Fire, more mature than the early works, they are all satirical in tone, realistic and natural in dialogue, and ingenious in plot. The characters are less angular and more convincing. Epicene and Bartholomew Fair are written entirely in prose, while The Alchemist is entirely in blank verse. His latter comedies, The Devil is an Ass, the staple of news, shows a distinct falling off in dramatic power. Johnson wrote two historical tragedies. First one is Sejanus, His Fall, and second one is Catiline, His Conspiracy. Both are composed on classical models. They are too labored and mechanical to be reckoned as great tragedies. They show immense learning, they have power, variety, and insight, but they lack the last creative touch necessary to stamp them with reality and to give them a living appeal. As for his masks, they are abundant, graceful, and humorously ingenious. Into them, Johnson introduced the device of the anti mask, which parodied the principal theme. The best of them are The Mask of Beauty, The Mask of Queens, and The Oberon the Fairy Prince. And he also composed lyrics. Many of lyrics appeared in Underwoods. These lyrics reflect no deep surge of emotion but are controlled, poised, and urban. If some of them are steep and most do not rise above mediocrity. So that is the devotion given by Johnson. There was another personality in this era, that was Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher. Yeah, you must see that name. Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher. Both combined to produce a great number of plays. They are said to be 52 in all. How much of the joint work is to be assigned to the respective hands is not accurately known. Fletcher is elder. He was a cousin of Giles and Phineas Fletcher. He was born at Rye, Rye, Sussex. He may have been educated at Cambridge. He lived the life of a London literary man. He died of the plague in 1625. His colleague Beaumont, who was probably the abler of the two, he was the son of a judge. Sir Francis Beaumont was educated at Oxford and he was entered the Inner Temple. He was captivated by the attractions of literary life. He died almost within a month of Shakespeare. He was buried in Westminster Abbey. Beaumont and Fletcher excelled in comedy, especially in the comedy of London life. Beaumont and Fletcher felt the influence of both Shakespeare and Johnson, but their plays are generally more superficial. They are mainly tragic comedies, full of striking incident and stage effect. Their plots sustain interest, they are ingenious, lively, and this piece is sometimes ascribed to William Browne, entertaining though rather loosely knit. The characters are numerous and widely varied. but the concentration on incident often makes them shallow. Full of witty dialogue, the plays attain a high level of lucidity and simplicity in their style, but they lack the Shakespearean wealth of imagery. A study of the style enables us to distinguish fairly clearly between the regular and flexible blank verse of Beaumont and the irregular verse of Fletcher. Typical comedies are A King and No King, The Knight of the Burning Pestle, The Scornful Lady. Yes, A King and No King was esteemed by Dryden as the best of them all. The Knight of the Burning Pestle was a very agreeable farce. The Scornful Lady was a tragedy. There was the another writers such as George Chapman, and he was born at Hitchin. Beyond this fact, little is known of him. He took part in the literary life of his time, for his name appears in the squabbles of his tribe. He died in London. Chapman's first play was The Blind Beggar of Alexandria. It was followed by many more, both comical and tragical. Among them are Busy Boys, Charles, Duke of Byron, The Tragedy of Chabot. These are historical plays. They deal with events nearly contemporary with his own time. Chapman's comedy include All Fools and Estuard Howe. There was another writer whose name was John Marston. He was born at Coventry. He was educated there and at Oxford. He became a literary figure in London. He later took orders. Latterly, he resigned his living in Hampshire and he died in London. John Marston was a member of the cynical school. He was specialized in violent and melodramatic tragedies. They impressed his own generation, who rated him with Johnson. For latter age, they are spoiled to a great extent by exaggeration, rant, and excessive speeches. Typical of them are Antonio and Melida, Antonio's Revenge, which were ridiculed by Johnson in the Poetaster. There was another writer whose name was Thomas Dekker. Yes, his name was Thomas Dekker. So, talking about Thomas Dekker, he was born in London where his life was passed as a literary hack and playwright. His plays have an attraction quite unusual for the time. They have a sweetness, an arc sentimentality, and an intimate knowledge of common men and things that have led to his being called the Dickens of the Elizabethan stage. Decker's plot are chaotic, his blank verse, which very frequently gives place to prose. It is weak and sprawling. The best of his plays are Old Fortunates, The Shoemaker's Holiday, Satyro-Mastics. He collaborated with other playwrights, including Ford and Rowley, with whom he wrote The Witch of Edmonton, Messenger in the Virgin Meteor. Thomas Middleton, the next writer. Middleton was born in London. He wrote much for the stage and in 1620 was made city chronologer. He is one of the most equable and literary of the dramatists of the age. He has a decided fanciful turn. He is a close observer and critic of the life of the time. He is dramatist who on a few occasions can rise to the heights of greatness. His most powerful play, which has been much praised by Lamb and others. Middleton wrote The Changeling, Women Be Women, The Witch, Macbeth and the Spanish Gypsy, which is a romantic comedy which suggests as you like it. Along with Dickens, Middleton wrote The Roaring Girl or Mole Cutpurse, which is a close dramatic parallel to the earliest novels. The last one is the personality, that is Thomas Haywood. Haywood was born in Lincolnshire about 1575. He was educated at Cambridge. He became an author and dramatist in London. He himself asserts that he had a hand in 220 plays, of which 23 survive. Like so many more dramatists of the time, Haywood uh, excelled in his pictures of London life and manners. He was a rapid and light improviser. He was an expert contriver of stage situations, but otherwise content with passable results and caring little about the higher flights of the dramatist. His best play is A Woman Killed with Kindness. In this play, the play contains pathetic scene. There was another play, The English Traveller, The Royal King and the Loyal Subject, The Captives is a series of clumsy historical dramas by King Edward and the Fifth. There was another person, Cyril Turner. He seems to have been a soldier and he served Low Countries. He took part in Buckingham's disastrous expedition to Cadiz and on his return died in England. And talking about Cyril Turner, he wrote two famous plays. First is The Revenger's Tragedy, second is The Atheist Tragedy. Both are melodramatic to the highest degree. In these plays, he attempts much but achieves little. He does not lack a certain poetic sensibility, but he lacks grip, method, and balance. He is weakest where Webster is strongest. So here, the other dramatists in the Elizabethan era. So here we have completed the Elizabethan era. So here I want to stop here. Thank you. See you.